I'm Jordan Hatfield, and this is Faster Film Critic. Today on the show, we talk Conclave with Chase Fugel and special guest Eric Wood. Conclave is a 2024 papal thriller directed by Edward Berger. This picture's sure to earn Ralph Fiennes a Best Actor nomination, but is he good enough to win? The film also stars Stanley Tucci and John Lithgow. Get in, we're going cinephiling.
Faster Film Critic.
Guys, how you doing today?
Feeling righteous.
I'm doing well.
Eric, we are really excited to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, man. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, so Eric is an educator. He's not just your everyday average educator. According to this podcast, he is the very best type of educator. Eric, you teach film.
I do. I teach film, I teach English, and recently took on yearbook. So
Well, I'm jealous. I would love to take one of your film classes.
it's pretty fun. We have a good time.
Great. Welcome, dude. We're very excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, man.
Let's start here. The title of the film is Conclave, and we all know what conclave is. Conclave is a meeting where cardinals are sequestered after the pope is passed and they choose the next pope.
So I had no idea what Conclave was
I
before
didn't
we
either.
started this. So
Well,
Yeah.
now you do.
now I
Yeah.
do. Thank you for
Nice.
educating me.
Educational movie.
Yeah, there you go. See, learn something new every day. This film is marketed as a thriller. What were your expectations, having seen the trailer? What were your expectations for this film going into it?
I actually tried to avoid everything about this movie. I didn't even look up what a conclave was. I just wanted to go in completely blind. I didn't even know it was advertised as a thriller. I mean, my expectations didn't really affect the way I viewed the film.
Yeah, my initial thoughts were with the lead actor. I knew a few of the names that were involved in it. I didn't even know the director was the All Quiet director.
Yeah,
So,
Edward Berger, All Quiet on the Western Front. Have you guys seen that film?
Yeah, it's great.
Definitely. Yeah, it was one of the best of that year.
I've seen that film several times. 2022, All Quiet on the Western Front. Seen it several times. Every time I see it, I appreciate it more and more. That film is amazing. If you like war movies and haven't seen it, you are missing out. Look this film up. Go check it out.
Have you seen the original? Did you go to the it was one of those movies. It was an old war movie that my dad was like all about. So he educated me as a young man. Did you see that one?
I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I haven't seen the whole thing start to finish.
Neither have I.
Sounds like you guys got to come over. We'll watch it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely different. Like it's a different take on it. And I think what stands out to me from his work earlier was either the cinematography or the sound, both of which were pretty spectacular.
Well, if you invite us over for a movie, you're in charge of treats. So we'll
Done.
see you tonight. And looking forward to that.
Popcorn, treats.
So what were your expectations going into Conclave, Eric?
I had pretty low to, I didn't know what to think. Like I said, I didn't know anything about a conclave, or I think I'm fairly religious, but I'm not familiar with Catholicism. Yeah, it was an interesting ride to experience. I didn't have a lot to begin with, and I felt like there was attention given to a lot of details, and it was almost one of the most exciting kind of, for lack of better words, boring. It was the most exciting, boring movie I've ever seen. Like it was just presented in a really captivating way. I think that the general idea isn't something that I'd totally be drawn to, but it really got my attention.
I'm not a Catholic. I have been to Catholic Mass on more than one occasion, and I'm somewhat familiar with the Catholic religion. There was a lot of things that were shown in this film that I was not aware of, but I thought the film did a really good job of bringing youth into the Catholic Church, even if you didn't have a background knowledge and you never felt lost.
Yeah.
You knew what was happening, even if you're unfamiliar with what a conclave is, why they do it, the people involved. You never felt like you were missing a backstory or missing information or facts to understand what was going on in the movie.
See,
Yeah.
I had a little bit of a different take on the way it was presented, because I feel like it threw you into the movie, threw you into what was going on, and like some of the tradition, some of the details. It was almost like you were experiencing something that you knew there was a great importance and reverence for, but I didn't know the minutia of that. I could tell that it was meaningful and just faith-related, but I did not anticipate some of the twists and turns and the way it goes. So I guess I felt like part of the way that Edward was taking us into this story was to just bring you in, show you these details, and almost build that anticipation with you not understanding all the procedures. I wondered if I was a diehard Catholic, if it would make as much sense, if it would be more meaningful or less, or if I'd be more worried about the specifics with it, because I don't know how much you understand in that. Like, I don't think everyone in Catholicism is, at that level of understanding with it. So for me, that ambiguity in the storytelling was really interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I remember when Pope John Paul II died. He died in 2005, and I remember watching on TV, like, the smoke coming out of the building, and I didn't understand exactly what that meant. I didn't realize that a conclave was happening, but I did know that meant that there wasn't a decision made. I didn't understand the implications of it. I do remember watching on TV the smoke coming out of the building and just it feeling like an important event, and I thought that was really cool. And so it was kind of fun to see that in this movie. It kind of brought me back to 2005, all the talk on the news about Pope John Paul and who the next pope was going to be.
It feels very important when you go into the movie. And I love the way that it introduced the cardinals. They're introduced as people. They're on their phones. They're going through TSA. You can tell that the film takes place a little bit in the future.
This is a more contemporary piece. This was also exploring with an understanding of, they don't care about this, or there were different humanistic elements to that. Like I may care differently than you care as a pope in your region or whatever. So I thought that was an interesting caveat to it.
Absolutely. I thought it did an interesting job of humanizing everybody.
Yeah.
We all have people that we look up to, be religious leaders or political leaders or celebrities or podcast hosts. Whoever it is that you're looking up to, these people are human and they make mistakes and they're not special relative to other humans. They hold a position that is special, but we're all human. We all are far more similar than we are different. The thing that jumped out at me the strongest and the earliest about this film was the cinematography. It grabbed me and it held my attention the whole way through. The way Stefan Fontaine grabs your attention, even in the most boring of scenes, I just thought was fascinating. I mean, there are times he's showing a pile of cigarettes, and the way it's filmed is just so interesting. There are times there's two men in a room with a cart full of robes, and I'm searching the whole screen.
Most of the movie is, a couple people, a lot of dialogue, and not what you would necessarily think is super exciting cinema.
Nevertheless, beautiful.
The cinematography is amazing. The lighting's amazing. The color and contrast in this film. This film is absolutely beautiful. And it's very common to say, when we're talking about a film that's got lots of landscapes that's outside in the country and mountainous, or that film is shot beautifully.
Yeah, it was a lot more cinematic than I expected it to be.
Very artistic, very cinematic, and it's mostly like 99% all shot indoors. Really
in the
cool.
same building.
In the same building. There's a scene where there's nuns in a kitchen and they're preparing food, and nothing special is going on, and yet the way that Stefan Fontaine captures this moment and then transitions to the next scene, I was just totally engaged. I thought the cinematography in this film was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, there's some beautiful shots. I thought that Fontaine's work in, Ammonite, I think I saw Captain Fantastic and Rust and Bones as well. Jackie I haven't seen, but I know that it's received some praise for the work. I think that the combination of Berger with Fontaine was a big deal as well, because I just think it elevated the work. I felt like just as All Quiet had some incredible shots and that just sucked you in, very similarly, I think you're getting sucked into this story that, maybe is not as exciting, not as many, landscapes that we're talking about, but just the tension in it really captivated you.
There was another scene that I just have to highlight. There's a couple fathers that are sitting in a theater and they're talking and they're kind of spaced out, and there's a light on them, but the rest of the theater is dark. You could have cut the dialogue out of the scene entirely, and I would have sat there for 5 minutes and been totally engaged. Like, I just thought the cinematography here was absolutely incredible. One of the most impressively shot films I have seen in some time.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I think the other scene that I would call to your attention is when they are gathering. I know there was, I don't remember where it came. I feel like it was more in the middle than that one you were referencing was towards the end. But the popes are kind of assembling and coming together for some sort of decision. It's almost like the walls are closing in on you as you see their, I think it's their white, or it's a combination of white and red that just pops off the screen. And they're in that kind of outside sort of around a fountain, and they're just slowly almost dripping down the screen. It's wonderful. I think that's my favorite shot.
The colors and the contrast, incredible. Absolutely incredible.
I love the use of red in this film. So good for really pulling that emotion together, the passion, power, all that.
I'm sure it would even make M. Night Shyamalan jealous, the way he uses red here.
I think the production design, like you were talking about, being on location in Rome and getting those shots, but also having that claustrophobic inside a small room space, the walls slowly coming in on you. I think that's part of what they were trying to get across, and part of what they were trying to show you is this experience of being almost trapped. And I think there's layers to that as well.
Yeah, Eric, great point. This film was, as I mentioned earlier, was marketed as kind of a thriller. This is not an action thriller, which is kind of what I expected going in. I mean, don't get me wrong. I knew it wasn't a Mission Impossible film, right? But I did expect something a little bit more active. I expected something a little bit more to kind of draw me to the edge of my seat. Yeah. That wasn't this film, but I would say it was definitely a thriller. I would say it was a dialogue thriller and not an action thriller. But there were moments, to my surprise, I found myself tense and I had to kind of relax a little bit. And this is all driven by dialogue. That's hard. That's hard to do. And I thought they did a great job with that. That was surprising to me.
I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned just briefly a moment ago about how you can just see what's going on but not necessarily have to hear it, even though it's such a dialogue-based story. And I thought that's a credit to Berger and being able to show this story and how it progresses so intensely, because this is not your typical thriller. This is not, scary action movie, those sort of things. And I think that, to me, that reception might be interesting. Like, I don't know what the reception is of this film, but for me, it's worth watching. But I don't know if it's necessarily one that I would always recommend. It's kind of an interesting blend of cinema.
It is. This film is hitting higher with critics than it is with audiences. It's on Rotten Tomatoes, it's 92% with critics and 82% with audiences. And it's slightly surprising to me based on the type of film this is. What'd you guys think of the cast here?
The cast and performances were really amazing. I was surprised to see John Lithgow as a priest in this film. I just saw him on the cast list before walking into the movie, and I was like, oh, it's funny he's a priest. He usually plays a great villain.
Yeah. I hear there is a cut of this film where he actually takes off his cross and stabs somebody, but it got
Really?
cut out. Yeah, I don't know the details. It hasn't been released.
I'm glad it got cut out.
I thought the cast here was amazing. I think Ralph Fiennes will be nominated for Best Actor. I hope he wins. He's never won a Best Actor award. Wow. I think he's a phenomenal actor in general. Everything he's in, I always really appreciate. I think he's absolutely deserving of an award, and I think this film may be the film that delivers that to him. There's a couple films coming up here at the end of the year, so he's going to have some competition. If the voting was today, I think he would win, but
I think he's definitely on the map with this. I mean, this is a powerful performance, and I'm not quite as in on all of his work. Tucci, I've always been a big fan of Tucci, and I felt like this was some of his finest work.
Agreed.
Lithgow, I feel really more reserved. I feel like there's not quite the meaty parts there are for the other main characters in the story, but I did feel like he really hit where he needed to.
Yeah, I thought the entire cast was phenomenal. There's not a weak link in this cast.
No. And it would have stood out for sure because of how strong everybody else is.
You mentioned cinematography being one of the first things that stood out to you. I think when I started watching the film, I think that the sound design was one of the strongest components. And I feel like Volker Bertelmann, who did the score for All Quiet, was back at it in a completely different style and way. But the way that tension builds immediately, before the title card even comes on, you're hearing the sound, you're hearing this tension, almost like these chords of suspense are being brought in there. So I think that was one of the most overpowering areas for me.
Yeah. Understated and subtle, too. It's not over the top. It's great. Just what the film needs.
I think understated is the best way to describe this score. Eric, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. Very impactful, very moody, draws you into the film, but it's not a score that jumps out at you.
Yeah.
Bravo. Amazing. I think this entire film in almost every aspect is very cinematic, very artful. There's really a lot here to appreciate.
So much. I know I said I went into this film without expectations, but I think everybody goes into this film with the expectations of cardinals and the Pope being almost like untouchable holy figures. And the juxtaposition between expectations of how these people should be and what actually is going on in the film, like the politics and the power dynamics. I found that so interesting and so good. That was my favorite aspect of the film.
Yeah, let's dive into the story a little bit.
Yeah.
Eric, you described it as the most entertaining, boring film you've ever seen.
I'm looking at some of my audience, like discussing this in the classroom if I brought it in. I think there are areas of just precision and incredible excellence. But I also think that the story, I want to explore it more because I'm interested in the adaptation, the work by Ed and it's Peter Strawn. No, Peter Strawn was the adapter, and Robert Harris was the author of the book. And I'm interested in what is similar, what's different, what choices were made that way. And I feel like it's just so dry and almost subtle, but it's very engaging. And I think that is really the magic. And I also feel like that's where Ed really rolls as a director. I feel like even All Quiet, I don't feel like, I mean, it's a more of a war-based movie, but there's parts of that where you're just looking at beautiful scenery and you don't need dialogue, you don't need explosions. It's just he brings it out of that. And I think that's really what's exciting to me about watching him and his work.
I didn't know this was based on a book.
Mm-hmm.
If Edward Berger was not directing this film, I would have seen it, but I wouldn't have been as excited as I was going into it, and I think he absolutely delivered. Incredible filmmaker. I'm very excited to see what he does next.
It's not an intense thriller, but there was one scene that I found myself really tensed up. And it was actually my favorite scene of the movie. It's when the rest of the cardinals are starting to accuse Cardinal Lawrence because he broke into the holy room, right? And the nun comes out and she speaks her truth, and it is so powerful. She comes to Lawrence's defense, and it feels so irreverent and inappropriate in the moment. But if it was a man that came out and said that, it wouldn't feel that way at all. And I think it was an amazing way of showing that women really aren't treated equally within the church, and there needs to be some change there.
The messaging in this movie, and I want to dive into this in more detail, but since you bring it up, this point that this nun comes in the room and she excuses herself, and she's like, I know that I am not supposed to speak, but I have something to say. I have eyes and I have ears. Chilling.
Amazing.
Because all of the men in this room went silent, and they listened to her, and she changed the entire direction of this meeting. She changed the entire outcome. And I don't think Berger could have hit this point any harder in such a small amount of time. But his message was very clear.
Really amazing scene.
I think the world in general, in religion, in politics, in business, I think the world in general would be better if women got that kind of attention and that kind of respect. They absolutely deserve it.
And the film doesn't say that to the viewer.
Nope.
It just shows it and lets the viewer come to the conclusion.
The entire message of this movie, and this is something that I loved so much, was about how we are equals. We're equal with other religions, equal with other races, equal with other sexes.
So what did you feel like the message specifically was, the theme? What to you stood out?
You know, there's a scene early on where the cardinals are eating. They're in the cafeteria. And Father Tedesco, who's played by Sergio Castellitto, he's an Italian, and he's talking to Father Lawrence, played by Ralph Fiennes. And he says to Father Lawrence in this moment, we used to all congregate together. Back when the church spoke Latin, when we were required to learn and speak Latin, we all commingled, we all spoke together. But now, because we've gotten rid of that, we segregate ourselves. The Italians sit with the Italians and they speak Italian. The French speak with the French in French, and the English sit together and speak English together. I thought this moment was very powerful because this is exactly what we see in the world today. We see division amongst races and languages, and yet we are far more similar than we are different. And that moment was one of the many moments where this message was just highlighted and driven home for me. There's also a political struggle and differences of politics. There's a lot of talks about the conservative Catholics and the liberal Catholics, and there's the fight there. And a lot of talk about fixing that divide and uniting there. So lots of different themes of unity and equality throughout this film that I absolutely love and I appreciate. And I feel like it hits at a time in this world where we need that message the most.
Yeah.
I thought the timing of it was really impactful. It was almost like you're exploring these polarizing sides, but without the political lens, but also having a political lens, weirdly enough, and bringing religion into it, which is, usually gets even more complicated. So I felt like that was a really timely experience. What was the theme that you pulled out the most, Chase?
Equality. And it hits hard, too. And it even introduces some new ideas that I have never thought about previous to this film. I love it when movies can push me out of my comfort zone. That's a sign of a good movie to me. One that's bold.
Something that's thought-provoking.
That's what I love about movies.
This film does that.
Yeah. With the theme of equality.
You know, another thing it does really well is it doesn't beat you over the head with that theme.
No.
Like, there's
No,
a lot of movies that just hammer
lets you come to your own conclusion.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies that just hammer it.
Yeah.
And by the end of the movie, it's like, I get it.
Yeah.
This film doesn't. This film...
Even in the end, it brings it to you, but lets you kind of explore it on your own. It treats the audience as though they're just smart and they're, ready to take it on and interpret it for themselves.
Yeah, very well done.
For me, I feel like the theme and just playing around with your religious aspects and the Catholicism and that faith, but then also humanizing that into there's so many people, main characters that have doubt, and that exploration of both faith and doubt and how it's not all, we're all on this is what we do. There's bickering between them. There's, just a lot of the humanistic difficulties that everybody has, and that exploration to me was really captivating.
Father Lawrence stands up in one scene and he's speaking to the other cardinals, and he gives this very short sermon almost on doubt versus certainty. And I thought that was so profound. That was one of my favorite moments of dialogue in the movie. I thought, often, at least in the culture that I live in, doubt is viewed as such a negative thing, as a weakness. And the way he explains doubt as a strength, and without doubt, there is no faith. I'm not much of a religious person, I will admit. But this message I still thought was so powerful, regardless of what your beliefs are. The idea that doubt is a strength and not a weakness really resonated with me. I once heard that if we believe the exact same thing now that we did 10 years ago, we've wasted 10 years. Challenging our beliefs and looking at our beliefs from a different perspective, all for a search of truth, is so important to me in my life, whether it's religion or politics or anything at all. Doubting my beliefs, questioning my beliefs, and searching for truth is really one of my core values, and I just love the message here. Loved it.
So good. Cardinal Lawrence, he expresses his views in private about how his faith in God stands strong, but with the church, he's struggling a little bit. And I think without that, the film would have had an entirely different outcome.
That was a very interesting idea in the film, and I love the way it played out.
To me, I think that the conclusion of it is interesting, the way that it all wraps up. And this is, again, where I haven't read the book, so I don't know if it's all the same or if there was some creative directing moves that were made. But I feel like the way it wraps up and it gives you this happens, and then it almost twists it a little bit for you. How did you guys interpret that?
Yeah,
Did it help or did it hurt, I guess?
I loved it. I found it shocking, and then I was shocked by the fact I was shocked, and then I spent the next 2 hours in an introspective dive of any bias or opinion that I may have. So I thought the way it ended was very impactful and thought-provoking and important.
Yeah.
I thought the message of this movie was, again, I've said it and I'll say it again, such an important message of inclusion and of equality, of us all being equal in the eyes of God, whatever the God that is that you look to, pray to, and worship. We are far more similar than we are different, and we are all equals. The value of a soul is equal, regardless of what language you speak, what your sexual orientation is, what your gender is. The value of a soul, we are all the same.
I think that the ending, it almost felt like a twist ending, but it wasn't, and it was just kind of out there. I'm just interested to see how that is received, if that story is accepted by the masses, or if that's part of like, it just feels like it gets into this area, and I can see just the religious side of it where it may rub people weirdly. If it's not well received, that's almost where I look at it in, if I'm going to use it to recommend it or in the classroom or to my parents or whatever, how would they take that scene? And is it all based on that conclusion and that final scene, or can they appreciate the body of work and everything that built into it to get it to where you guys, I feel like, are talking about it?
The ending is the exclamation point on this message of equality. And one thing the film asks is, if this film makes you uncomfortable, why? Okay, let's rate this film. 1 out of 5.
This was an amazing movie. I give it 4.5.
I'm going to go 3.5.
This film is a 5-star film in so many different ways, in my opinion. I've thought about coming in at a 4. I just can't. Everything about this film I thought was masterfully done. Bravo to everyone involved. This is a 5-star film. It's a must-see film. Absolutely love it. If you enjoy films with a religious framework, particularly ones that are controversial, I would highly recommend the 2015 film Spotlight by Tom McCarthy. This film deals with heavy adult themes that are extremely uncomfortable, but it is absolutely a film worth a watch. Thank you for supporting Faster Film Critic, and please join us next time when we revisit an old haunted house in 1980's The Changeling, directed by Peter Medak. You can also follow us on Letterboxd, Cinetrack, and Instagram. Email us at fasterfilmcritic@gmail.com. Hit us up if you have any questions, comments, feedback, or review requests, and please share this episode with your movie-loving friends.